I'm James Cottingham from DK Engineering, and we're here at our headquarters in Chorleywood, and today we're going to talk about my Ford GT. In the world of automotive racing, the Ford GT40 is a legend, and everyone knows about the Ford versus Ferrari battle of the mid-60s when Ford was famously going to buy Ferrari from Enzo Ferrari, and at the last minute he changed his mind. So Henry Ford decided that his thing was that he was going to go and beat Ferrari at Le Mans, which he did with the GT40, which was actually built in England originally. Not many people acknowledge that, but the original Mark I GT40 was built in England. So I have an original Ford GT40, which I own with a friend, Andrew Smith. We've owned the car for 10 years and we've raced it all over the world. We've raced it at the Le Mans Classic a number of times, Goodwood Revival numerous times, and most famously on the Tour Auto in France, which is the modern interpretation of the Tour de France. It's a 5-day rally that's 3,000 kilometres, 11 special stages, which are flat out on closed roads and circuits, which we won overall in 2017, and we would have won by 7 minutes in 2018, but we broke the gearbox on the very last special stage, which was a real shame. And we would have won the event overall, so not only in the pre-66 category, but in the pre-73 category as well, which is quite an achievement for a GT40. We've had so much fun with that car, and it's a very well-known car. It's chassis 1029, which went to Le Mans in 1966 and actually had an accident in qualifying, and it was involved in the accident where famously the Works Fords were going to be forced to withdraw from the race because of the protests that were in place as a result of the accident, but they didn't in the end. We've had a lot of fun with it, and it's a well-known car because it has a great livery. It's silver with a tricolor stripe, has a number plate 1 muff, which everyone always seems to remember for some reason. And yeah, it's just one of the best cars. And when you take it to Le Mans, that is the place where you really realise what a GT40 is all about. And as soon as you go down the Mulsanne Straight for the first time, you just feel at home in that car. It's absolutely what it was built to do, was to win that race. And you know, a couple of years ago, I remember racing it down the Mulsanne Straight in the middle of the night, sort of 4 in the morning, pitch black, and looking down at the digital speedo, and it was just touching under 300 kilometres an hour. And it's a real sort of pinch yourself moment when you have that opportunity to do that. So yeah, it's a very special car for me. So our car is chassis 1029, which was the Scuderia Bear car, was owned by Bill McKelvey when it was new, and raced at Sebring in 1966 and Le Mans in 1966, although it didn't start the race at Le Mans because it had a big accident in qualifying and the original tub was written off. Andrew and I restored the car about 10 years ago and have been racing it since all over the world. So the original GT40 to drive, it's a pure race car. But actually, the first time we went to go and do our first special stage on the Tour Auto, everyone always said to us, oh, it's such a big car, it's so low, it's going to be a real handful. But it's such a strong, robust chassis and tub. It feels like whatever you throw at it, whether you hit speed bumps flat out or big undulations in the road, stuff like that, it just eats the road and absorbs it, and it drives so well. And you've got that amazing 289 V8, which these days they're built to produce somewhere between 400 and 450 horsepower. I mean, as it goes up through that 5-speed box, you just can't believe how much it continues to accelerate. There's no sort of easing off. If you're going down the Hanger Straight at Silverstone, you get into 5th gear and you think that the rate at which it's going to accelerate is going to sort of slow down slightly, but it just keeps pulling, keeps pulling. And it's a real race car. It's a tough, strong race car built to last 24 hours. So, as a race car, it's a bit heavy. Not everyone gets on with them, but once you grab it by the scruff of the neck and really own the car, it's an incredibly rewarding car to drive, and it's a real race car. You sit very low, you're almost horizontal, you've got this big steering wheel, you've got the gear lever on the sill. It's very different to other racing cars. And then on the road, it is quite usable in a weird way. I mean, it's noisy, it's very hot, but once you're going along, it is a usable thing. And I've gone on different tyre kicker club and stuff like that, events like that, where I've driven it 100 miles in a day and 100 miles back. I can't hear anything by the end of it, even though I've had defenders on the whole day. But it works, and when you're going along the motorway and you're sitting so low, you know, they were supposed to be 40 inches. I think these days they're probably a bit lower than 40 inches with the way we have the car set up. But you're going along and you're so low compared to everyone else on the road. And everyone hears it coming first, and then they see it coming and they want to have a look. And I think that's probably why it's, you know, alongside the Cobra, one of the most replicated cars ever. It's just that iconic sort of pure, perfect race car design. And yeah, it was Eric Broadley's best. You know, the guy behind Lola, it was his design originally. It was probably his all-time best design. When this Ford GT was released, what I loved about it was that they went racing first. You know, it was a race car that they were going to build road cars off, and they had to at some point for homologation purposes. But they went to Le Mans to win Le Mans. And clearly, I was there that year. You know, the whole season they'd been sandbagging, and even in qualifying they were sandbagging. And then when it came to the race, they were just streets ahead of everyone else. So it was an out-and-out race car with a proper carbon tub. Everything's very special. When you look at the way it's designed, you know, the cockpit is absolutely tiny for aero. You know, you have two people in there, it's really small. But that's because it's a race car. And then they built a road car. And for me, that's kind of, you know, there are two ways about going about it. And I think quite often manufacturers sit in the middle. You know, like a 458 or a 488 for me as a road car is very much in the middle. It's sort of a car they built to sort of appeal to all markets. And then they built a racing car that's very successful. And you have your soft version, you have your hardcore version. The Ford GT was built as a race car. And then they thought, right, we'll turn this into a road car for homologation purposes. And it has no storage, it has tiny fuel tank, all the stuff that, you know, people like Clarkson complain about. But that's what makes it so great. That's why I love that car. And so when they announced they were going to build the road cars, it was clear they were going to be very exclusive. And actually, Andrew and I were on the Tour de France, or the Tour Auto, and we were talking about it. And when we got back, we just sent in a video of us doing a special stage in our original car. And you know, few years, well, I think it was about a year later or 6 months later, it came through that we got a car, which we were really lucky to. Little did we know how special that was going to be, that, you know, as of now, in 2018, they delivered just 80 cars to Europe. Only 12 of those are UK cars, and they haven't delivered a single car in 2019 or 2020. So in terms of specification for the current Ford GT, there is no dealership. So we actually did the sort of ordering of the car online, and you're only given a very limited number of specifications. So you can have, 4 or 5 different combinations, but you had, 4 interior options, 5 exterior options, and then there were caliper choices, sports exhaust, stuff like that. So it was quite limited. You can't personalize the cars massively, which for us was a bit of a problem because we couldn't have the stripe. So the only stripes they offer are the ones that are on offer, and none of those matched our car. So we went for the modern grey, which I think's liquid grey or liquid silver, whichever one it is for the Ford. We went for the Lightspeed interior, which was the highest spec interior, which has the blue Alcantara and the leather seats. And originally we went for red calipers to match the original car, which had red spinners, but we decided at the end to go for blue calipers because it just wasn't going to look right. I'm really pleased with the way it turned out. And then when it came to the UK, we put the stripe on with vinyl and then PPF'd over it, which you can do these days, and obviously it can come off if ever we want to. So this, the spec is very much a modern interpretation of chassis 1029, the original GT40 that we have, of how that car was and how this car is now. And it works really well. And having them as a pair, it just, when people see them, they suddenly get it. And how often can you actually do that? I was always surprised with F12 TDFs that people didn't copy the original liveries of Tour de France's, apart from the car that we had, the 0585 Omaggio. That was, everyone loved that, but I don't understand why people didn't do it more during the ordering process, but each their own, I guess. So once we'd ordered the Ford GT, the buying process was, pretty straightforward in terms of deposit, and when the car was about to arrive, we had to pay the balance, of course. But they delivered the car to us, with a Ford concierge service, again, which I think's sort of the future. Quite often I will sell cars and never meet the guy I've sold it to, and we'll just deliver the car in our truck. And if it's a first-time purchase or it's a complicated car, I'll go along and do the handover. That's exactly what Ford did, because I guess they see their clients as being busy, plus they don't have somewhere salubrious to hand it over. They don't have a Maranello to hand the car over. I guess, no one really wants to go to Ford Dagenham to go and pick up their Ford GT. So they delivered it to us and they handed the car over properly with someone who knew the car inside out, talked us through all the controls and all the stuff that came with it, and it was really useful because I never read the instruction manual anyway for anything. So, I actually knew right from the start how everything works, and it was a good way to do it. So they have this concierge system, and when it comes to servicing the car, they came to pick it up and it went to Multimatic, was serviced there and came back, and they dealt with all the little niggly things that we had, like our number plate falling off, which was our fault for not fitting it properly. So yeah, it's been quite a sort of very easy process, and you definitely feel exclusive. You realise that there are only 12 cars in the UK and they're looking after them in this tiny sort of bubble, so it's very good. So now in October 2020 we will have had the car for 2 years. We've used it mainly on the road to just go to and from some race meetings and things like that, although it's proved a little bit impractical because it has no boot. Well, it has a little boot. But yeah, I've just been to a few events. I'd love to get it on track at some point, which is definitely the next time I'm invited to go and do a track day, which I don't normally do track days because of all the racing I do. I'll definitely take someone up on that opportunity and take the Ford. So to summarise the way the car drives, it is very firm, it's very planted. You have your different modes, you have sport and you have track, and obviously you want to have it in track because it looks low and it's got the big wing up, but it becomes a bit unwieldy, in that situation whenever you go over bumps. But in sport, it's, because of that complicated suspension, it's incredibly compliant. So it just rides B roads really well. It's got a very clever gearbox, it's a 7-speed, obviously. It's fast through the gears, but it's always thinking for you, so it's always got the gears, selected, so it's got almost, it's almost like a seamless single clutch system. And what I mean by that is it's not too seamless like a double clutch system. It still has a slight rawness to it, but it always knows what you're about to do. Long journeys on a motorway, super comfortable. It's got all the Ford navigation, radio, all that sort of stuff. It's got a lot of creature comforts that a lot of cars wouldn't have. Obviously it doesn't have the cubby holes and things to put sunglasses and stuff, but it does have everything you need to do that. And then, throwing it around a country road, it's just got such amazing traction. Steering input is a little bit on the heavy side, but I quite like that from a racing car side of things. Tremendously good brakes, but ultimately the seating position is fantastic. It's, you're sitting in it like a race car. It doesn't have any adjustment to the seat really at all. It has a little bit of recline adjustment, but you move the pedals and you move the steering wheel to get to where you want. And it's, as I mentioned earlier, it's a really narrow cockpit, but it's got these great big mirrors that aren't actually big on the outside, but when you're inside, they just work perfectly and you've got really good visibility. And it's got a reversing camera and stuff like that. So it's an easy car to get on with. It does do sort of A to B, no matter what the road, very, very well. I think the biggest criticism of it is that you can't leave it in track mode when it's turned off. I hate that. You go to turn it off and it just pops up, which is a bit of a party trick, but then when it's parked there, you want it to look mean and cool, and it looks not as good as it could do, which kind of annoys me, but that's a silly little thing. What I think surprising about the Ford GT is that it fits in a bracket that doesn't really exist at the moment for other car manufacturers. So it's not hypercar, but it's way above supercar. It's in a bracket, roughly £600,000 new if you're lucky enough to get one, somewhere between £700,000 and £800,000 today if you buy one second-hand with fair mileage. It's in a bracket where it's, you turn up at an event like a supercar driver event, there won't be another one there. And it has heritage behind it. It's a Le Mans winning chassis, and it was built as a race car to be a road car. And it's also the third generation of a great series of cars, probably one of the most iconic race cars ever. So it's got so much going for it that's already built into that brand. And yes, it's a Ford badge, but that's kind of part of the attraction of it. It's not your obvious Italian, over-styled. It's very much form follows function. I love the fact that it sits in that bracket that doesn't really exist anymore. It exists in historic cars and classic cars. There's loads of stuff up there, like you know, F12 TDFs and 509 GTOs are kind of in the same bracket, but they started off at a lot less, and they are, you know, on paper they are nothing like as good a car. That car is a special occasion car, partly because it's slightly compromised in its usability, because it's big and because it doesn't have a long-range fuel tank and because it doesn't have a big boot and cubbyhole. You know, it's got to be the right occasion for the car. So you do tend to use it a bit less than you would do. You know, when I had a 509 GTO, I'd jump in it any time. You know, rain, snow, whatever. Loads of bags in the boot, race kit in the boot, whatever, and it could do everything so well. The Ford can't, because it's not that car. It's not a GT car that's been made a bit more sporty. It's a race car on the road. So it's always a special occasion when you get in it, and it's always surprising. It's not quite what you remembered. It does it slightly differently, especially because it's got the V6, which again a lot of people say, oh, it's a shame, but it's, you know, it's such a clever engine, and that was part of the reason that they did so well at Le Mans, was that engine. And it's the way things are going. You know, they're actually quite ahead of their time, I think, with the way that they've designed that car and the way they put the bits together, and you know, the spec sheet of it. It's actually where we're going. Lightweight cars with small capacity engines with turbos. So is it possible to find one? Yes, of course. There are cars out there that people will sell for a premium. And do I think it's worth it? Absolutely. You know, I think that the Ford GT, like the F40, it's an iconic car. And what's always held an F40 back is that there are a few too many of them, but try and find a really good car. The difference is on the Ford GT, it's an extremely rare car. And they've got so much behind them heritage-wise, technology-wise. They're compromised in their sort of usability, but it's always in a special occasion, much like an F40. So I think that, you know, you can buy a car out there and that they are a really good thing to have. And, you know, have one of those in a collection, plus a couple of other cars, versus the millions that people are paying for certain other cars from other manufacturers. You know, I'd have the Ford GT and an F40 and something else every day of the week. So yeah, that's why I've got one.